Nice to be here.
Great to meet you. And I see Trustee Phillips has joined us as well. We have staff, Mr. Jordan, Ms. Haney, Ms. Espinosa, and Ms. Molina. Great to see everybody again tonight after a regular board meeting yesterday.
Hi now, 2 in a row.
Yes. And more to come next week and the following. Okay.
Right.
Great. Okay. So we are going to get started since we have 3 board members and we will wait for Trustee Cuevas and Trustee Lara to join us. Superintendent Duffy, would you be able to reach out to them? See if they are on their way?
Yes, I just sent a note, to find out where they're at.
Thank you. So good evening, everyone. I would like to call to order the October 8, 2020 special meeting of the West Contra Costa Unified School District Board of Education. I hope everyone joining us tonight is doing well and that everyone is at home is in good health. We continue to meet via Zoom for all district and board meetings as authorized by the Governor's Emergency Executive Order issued on March 17, 2020. The West Contra Costa Unified School District Board of Education will conduct board meetings via video teleconference until further notice. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Right, and we have Trustee Lara now.
Excellent. Welcome, Trustee Lara. I would like to, again, welcome you and thank you for joining us tonight. I would like to share some basic instructions regarding how we will be using Zoom today and involving members of the public. We'll be having live public comments via Zoom. This may result in some uncomfortable situations, so we hope you will bear with us as we navigate any issues that may come up. It is our hope for members of the public to be able to participate and share their public comment with the board in a space conducive to a respectful public forum for all. During the meeting, all board members and the superintendent will be on video throughout the board meeting. Staff members are also present and will be on video when they present. Members of the public will not be on video and will be muted throughout the meeting unless they have raised their hand for public comment. In order to comment on an agenda item at tonight's meeting, members of the public should raise their hand by pressing the Raise Your Hand button on the Zoom app or pressing *9 by telephone when the board reaches the item on which you want to comment. Excuse me. If you are calling in with your phone and your name is called, press *6 to unmute your phone and turn on your microphone. When we get to the item, a member of district staff will call your name. Comments will be restricted to the amount of time allocated by board policy. Your hand must be raised before the first comment is finished. After the first comment, besides the ones who already raised their hand on Zoom. In order to be recognized to speak, you must be using a first and last name. Thank you. Now we will share the same directions in Spanish. Para hacer un comentario sobre un artículo en la agenda, se le pide al público que por favor levante su mano al presionar el botón de levantar la mano en la aplicación de Zoom o al presionar estrella 9 por teléfono cuando lleguemos al artículo para cual usted quiera hacer su comentario. Si está llamando por teléfono, por favor presione estrella 9 para prender el micrófono de su teléfono. Cuando lleguemos a ese artículo en la agenda, un personal del distrito escolar llamará su nombre. Los comentarios serán restringidos al tiempo asignado por las normas de la mesa directiva. Su mano debe estar levantada antes de que el primer comentario sea completado. Después de que el primer comentario termine, no se aceptarán comentarios nuevos aparte de los que ya hayan levantado su mano. Para ser reconocido para comentar, debe usar un primer nombre y un apellido. Gracias. I also want to know that members of the public can translate the meeting agenda webpage by clicking on the button labeled English with the globe icon next to it to translate the meeting into multiple languages. And we have interpretation services available via Zoom by clicking on the globe icon on Zoom, on the Zoom app. Thank you. Superintendent Duffy, can we please have roll call?
Sure. President Hernandez-Jarvis.
Present.
Trustee Panis.
Present.
Trustee Lara.
Present.
Trustee Phillips.
Present.
And I don't think we have Trustee Cuevas.
Okay.
Absent.
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent Duffy. And I don't see student representatives currently in the meeting. So we will wait to see if they will be able to join us as well. Thank you. So members of the public, that was the third agenda item under section 8, opening procedures. So now we are going to have items, well, the only item on B, opportunity for public comment on agenda items. If there's any members of the public who would like to share their public comment with us, this would be the moment. Please make sure that you raise your hand on Zoom by clicking raise your hand on the actual app or by pressing *9 to raise your hand that way. We'll give that a few moments so folks can raise their hands.
We have one public comment from Joanna Pace.
Great, thank you. Ms. Pace.
Good evening, board. This is Joanna Pace, a resident of El Cerrito and a parent of a West County alum. I want to just mention that on the screen that I can see, I'm not able to see the number of attendees and the number of panelists. Sometimes it is easy to see that, but in this case, they're not there. My comment this evening is just to remind the board that we're in a pandemic. Sometimes it seems, as I watch these board meetings, that board members have forgotten the amount of stress that families are under, and that anything you can do to lead by example, to show how to cope in a positive way, and to be respectful, and to just acknowledge that we're in a very unusual public health emergency, and that people need all the support and positive outlook that they can get to help them survive these unusual times. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is all the hands. I also see Ms. Cuevas in the attendee box, so we'll get her promoted to panelist.
Great.
And we should be ready to go.
Thank you. And the speaker that just shared with us right now that she couldn't see the attendees, is that a usual feature for our regular meetings that they can see the attendees? Maybe Mr. Jordan would know?
Yeah, I don't know that they can. I will just say so far there's 11 panelists, which includes myself, the 5 board members, Mr. Cohn, and some of our translators. And then we have 7 additional attendees.
Yeah, I'm sorry for some, President Hernandez-Jarvis, for some reason I'm switching to the gallery view and it's not flipping over, so I'm working on it so that they can see all the panelists that are talking. I'm trying to get it fixed, so bear with me.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Thank you.
you.
And thank you to members of the public for your patience too as we work through this. Welcome, Trustee Cuevas. Thank you for joining us. Before we go to the next item, C1, the activities that we have planned, I would like to give a moment to Mr. Cohn to be able to introduce himself if he would like to at this point, so that the board can hear and the public can hear about, you and who you are and how you're going to join us today in this conversation.
Sure. Thank you. Delighted to be with you this afternoon. My name is Carl Cohn. I'm an old guy. I've had 50 plus years in education, including superintendent of schools in Long Beach, San Diego, and court monitor in Los Angeles. I spent a delightful day in your district last fall as a consultant to the Hewlett Foundation. And there's nothing more important to me than urban school boards doing better and making successful transitions, including transitions that include major governance structure changes. And so taking stock of where you are as a current board, recognizing that there will be new board members there soon, a different makeup, is still valuable and important. There's nothing that benefits historically underserved school children better than successful transitions with regard to the leadership of an organization. So I'm delighted to be a part of this, and that's my ultimate agenda, that those youngsters in West Contra will benefit from a smooth, effective leadership transition in this next year.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cohn, for your words and for being here today. We appreciate it. Thank you. So
And
I think we have Superintendent Duffy.
Oh, I just wanted to provide also a little bit more context. You know, we have our annual retreat, sometimes twice annual. It's been really hard to get everybody together through COVID and the pandemic. And I had had a chance. My internet is not very good this evening, so just please let me know if you miss anything. I had a chance to talk with Carl over the past few years, get to know him and his work a little bit, and heard some of the talks that he's given with former board members around how to continue to strengthen governance in a district, and thought that he would be a good facilitator for us for this retreat. And we did now it is scheduled here in October, so we are coming to a November election when we know there will be transition. So we've also built that into the agenda. So the way we've laid out the agenda, and I can bring up my screen if folks need to see it, is really to start with board reflections around what is the board, what does the board think is really working right now? What are they most proud of? And then where do they see the needs for improvement? And then to do that same activity specifically around governance, to get a chance to hear about learnings from Long Beach Unified. And we sent you the case study there, and then have an opportunity to really talk about transition to a new board. And how do we want to transmit the goals of the current work of the board, of the roadmap to new members, and talk about governance transitions and priorities. And then, you know, if there's some time, I had put some of my goal setting, but I don't know that we're going to get to that. And I know we're using the same document and form, and I think we have some other spaces to potentially do that. So I really wanted this to be a time for the board superintendent discussion, and about how we move together over these next couple of months and through the transition. So that's really the layout for this evening. I don't know, Carl, if you wanted to share anything more just about the process before we jump in.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Mr. Cohn, would you like to add anything?
Just so that you should know, normally when I do this, I actually work with a school board member, a longtime former Long Beach school board member, and I always think that it's important that the perspective of a board member is also part of the facilitation. She buried her 96-year-old father yesterday, so she isn't available. But when I do this work, it's about modeling how superintendents and board members actually work together for the welfare of youngsters.
Thank you. Thank you for framing it that way and for really reminding us of the purpose of this, and my condolences to your colleague and her family. We wish them the best. Thank you so much.
Yep.
And so with this, I think that we are at a point where we are ready to move forward with the first activity, and that is our board reflection, C1. Thank you both for framing the conversation, and I know that there are no attachments to this. Superintendent Duffy, yeah. I didn't hear what you said.
I'm sorry. I have just a one page of guiding activities, so I'll bring that up. And Mr. Jordan, I shared that with you via email. It's a shared doc, and if you can bring that up, it's activities board reflection. But the first question is, and I'll let you expand on it, Carl, it's as a board, what's working right now in WCCUSD generally? What are you most proud of generally? And so in this case, we're not really speaking of governance so much, like how you're governing, because we're going to get to that second, but just generally, what are you most, yeah, if we could scroll up a little bit on that, if that's possible, Mr. Jordan. Perfect. There we go. Yeah. So now I can turn it over to you, Carl, as facilitator. But that was our first question.
Great.
There. What's working
Sure.
right now generally?
Great.
This is, go ahead,
So I wanted to ask,
Board President.
do you think, thank you, Mr. Cohn, do you think it would be beneficial to continue to use the same turn-taking system that we've been using, or do you want this to be, I mean, you're completely in charge of facilitating it, so would you like to have us use that, or just share as we feel when we're ready to?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Sorry. So usually when we begin to have a discussion, we have like a system of taking turns so that, you know, each board member has the time to begin the discussion. So for example, a rotation order, like beginning with Trustee Cuevas, Trustee Phillips, Trustee Lara, Trustee Panas, and then myself. If you think that it would be the most beneficial for this retreat to not do that and to just do it differently, I'm open to that. So I just wanted to clarify how we usually do it and hear from you if you think that that would make sense for this or a different way.
I think
Mr. Cohn, did we lose the audio? His audio?
I think perhaps, yeah, I think perhaps, yeah. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now, yes.
Okay. I think perhaps no particular order, just allowing board members to reflect on what are you proud of? What do you think's working in the district? Couple of things that you think West Contra is doing well right now.
Thank you. So if board members, please feel free to jump in when you're ready to share.
So I'm very pleased with the work that we've done regarding safety as we talk about reopening our schools. I know that there's been a lot of, many people have different opinions about this, but I think we've been very respectful of those opinions and tried to prioritize the safety of our students and our staff.
I would say that something that I'm very proud of in general right now, currently, I think that definitely the ability to talk about what does it mean to create a space that's equitable and not colorblind equity just on the surface and on the face of documents that we have, but what does it actually mean to begin to explore what an anti-racist classroom is? What is the equitable practice to ensure that we don't promote anti-Blackness in classrooms? What is the actual practice that's going to help us to bridge, you know, the gaps that we have in welcoming LGBTQIA+ students? Like, we're beginning to have those conversations, and I think last year we were not at that point at all. So I would say that that's something that has, you know, come up toward the last few months that we've been together on this board, really to create the space to talk about it and talk about what does it mean to be actively bringing diversity, equity, and inclusion to our practices.
Yeah, I have some. Um, I think I'm really proud of the commitment of the staff, the faculty. I mean, people that work here are truly dedicated to this community. There's a strong sense of community, and a lot of people work in our uh, schools and who grew up here. And so there's that very strong sense of community. I'm proud of the way that the district has stepped up when it comes to social emotional wellness. I think that's been something that has been exceptional. But I think the thing that comes out to me very unique is the relationship building that has developed over time. And by that, I mean with the administration and the bargaining units. And so with that relationship, they have been able to come up with a lot of solutions to a lot of issues that we've had. And that group is, when they come together, it's very solutions oriented. And I think that's quite unique. And I'm very proud of that exists. Thank you.
I'm going to step in real quick one more time to share that I think something else that I'm proud of is the technology attainments, the move toward having more equity in technology too, so closing the tech gap.
So there's not a President Hernandez Jarvis. So there isn't just an awkward silence on my part. I'm going to say that, to be honest, I feel a little uncomfortable in this conversation right now. And I'm not saying this to say the conversation shouldn't go on. I just want to explain why. I'm just staring at the screen. I feel a little uncomfortable doing this kind of public debrief a couple of weeks before the election, when I know that there are people running who are on this board, running for this board and for other positions, and me kind of, talking people up or talking people down. I don't necessarily feel really comfortable with that. And I know folks may not see it that way, but that's kind of how I feel. So I'm going to probably do more listening tonight than you've ever seen me do.
Thank you for explaining that, Trustee Phillips. And I would like to just encourage, that the engagement can be as a step up, step back, or step in, step out. So if you feel like your role right now would be better serving to the public and to the community by listening and stepping back and taking in the information, I think that's fine. I think that's a way to also engage and participate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So sorry, Madam Chair, I'm a little slow because I'm a little under the weather. So I would say that there's a couple of things that I think are worth drawing some attention to that I think have been, I wouldn't necessarily say working right now, but I would say are evidence of something that we've approached and outcomes-wise, we've done really well. The first is when this pandemic hit, we're a high-need school district, and while other districts struggled to switch over to distance learning immediately and what that would mean, and also address the social emotional and food services needs of our highest need students through our nutrition programs. I think we did that really well. Particularly the fact that we kept and we found a community that came together and found a way to make sure that we were still offering meals for our students. When we talk about serving the students of this district, recognizing that the important role of schools is, yes, for their minds, but also making sure through our food services programs and nutrition programs that they have nourishment for their bodies so their minds can continue to grow. And because of that, we even had a sense of volunteerism where folks stepped up at sites and served our communities. And because of that, there was also an openness to feedback on what we needed to do to get better to make those distribution sites accessible. On top of that, I'm proud of the fact that this community had the foresight to, for the most part, deploy a set of resources for devices, a significant number. That meant that we weren't like a number of other districts that were trying to secure significant amount. We mostly were trying to make up gaps that we had, but for the most part, we were a one-to-one device district, and that helped. I'm proud of the fact that we have a community that is willing and open to let us know how they've experienced that transition of education through this pandemic. I'm proud of the fact that our focus on instruction meant that there were expectations and relationships there that were then able to be deployed to how we would improve distance learning when we had more time to organize it. So through this pandemic, based on what I have heard, what some of the other challenges have been across the state with other districts, I think we've done really well.
Thank you, Trustee Cuevas. And I hope you feel better.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes. I can't see your video anymore, Mr. Cohn, or hear you. I don't know if you're speaking right now. We can see you again.
Okay, let me see.
Is my computer frozen? I'm sorry, Mr. Cohn. I think we missed what you said. I couldn't hear.
Yeah, sure. Have all the board members who wanted to get in on what is working now, have they all had an opportunity? Are there any other points or bullets that board members want to make with regard to what you all think is working well now? Okay.
Thank you.
You know, this pandemic is extraordinary. I'm hosting a podcast for EdSource called Schools on the Front Lines, and I'm talking to people up and down the state, and it's just been extraordinary. But let me see if I understand some of these bullets. Listening to the community as we open schools. And Tom, did you frame that as safely opening?
I did, and I was framing it both as our decision very early on, the board's decision to close the schools.
Got it.
And then being very careful and sensitive to the health of our students and communities and everyone. In when we reopen the schools, yes.
you know, as a veteran of work with urban districts, can someone say more about the bargaining unit admin collaboration?
Yeah, that was my comment. We have what's called the solutions team that meets once a month, and it really has all the units can participate, and it's facilitated, outside facilitator, and we bring them some hard questions, you know, some of the hard issues, and able to be very honest with each other at those meetings. And I think, you know, it's not always easy, it's not perfect, but it's like everybody wants to try it. Everybody wants to get in there and do the work and work it out. And I think it is a place where people feel heard and they can participate. And like they feel like it's equal. We're on an equal plane here. So I've really enjoyed being a part of that and seeing that. And I listen to other board members in other districts close by, and that is one of their biggest issues, that there's just this, you know, between bargaining units and the administration, that they just cannot meet, you know, see eye to eye or on anything. I mean, I see it's really difficult thing. So I think this is something pretty unique for a school district. So that was why I brought that up.
And then with regard to closing the technology gap, your system has, if I remember correctly, 28,000 plus students.
Yeah.
And are there students without devices, or are you saying every student has some sort of digital connectivity?
Yeah, so I actually brought that up, and I think Trustee Cuevas built on with her comment as well about being a one-to-one district, meaning that one device per child. And there were I think that there were a lot of things we needed to take care of at the beginning of the emergency distance learning that we did in the spring and when schools were suddenly closed. But for the most part, students had access to a device, and other neighboring school districts did not necessarily have that. And so it created kind of like a hurry to get devices to all kids. Whereas for us, it was more a hurry to get devices to the younger kids that didn't have them, or to the ones that had devices that were not working properly. But it was, I think the district, you know, the previous board had really prepared with having that initiative. And then the current board had made sure that we approved, I think it was in 2019, to purchase new ones and to essentially get the devices to the kids that didn't have them and replace ones that were obsolete or not working as well. And so last night we actually had a presentation and an update that we have an inventory of hotspots still available. So if anybody still needs to have internet access, they can get that. But we're at a point where we are in a place with students having connectivity and having the devices to connect to the district learning platforms and classes.
Sure. Yeah. It's a huge issue up and down the state in terms of youngsters without digital support. And I think it's part and parcel. You may remember the Williams lawsuit that the ACLU did several years ago, arguing that if youngsters don't have textbooks, it's government's responsibility to make sure that they do. And so I think it's really important that it's already been established by the Williams lawsuit with regard to digital being what an old textbook was back when. So the more you're addressing that, the better off you're going to be on that perspective. Anything else that any board member wants to get up here on what's working right now before we move on to areas for improvement?
I think it looks like we're ready. I don't see anybody else.
So what are the most significant areas for improvement? Things that you, as a board, taking stock of where you are now in terms of this coming year of transition, what are those areas for improvement from your point of view?
I can begin if that's okay with the rest of the board. I think that the overarching theme for me is literacy, because when I look at it from any direction, if it's having an African-American student success, you know, around literacy, like having a plan, African-American student literacy, and having ELL, English language learner literacy, a DLI plan, dual language immersion plan, that centers around the work of bilingual literacy, by literacy. And so I think that all of these things tied together really echo, or not echo, but reiterate to me the need to have a literacy shared vision around literacy. And what does it look like to actually have kids be fully literate by 3rd grade? Because if they're entering our district in TK, some even in preschool, we're having them 3 to 4 years before they meet, you know, the 3rd grade level. And so what does it mean to have fully literate students, and that can actually not just, you know, learn to read, but read to learn? And what are, because I think that we're having a lot of outcomes and consequences, academic and social, with students not being able to read by 3rd grade. And then what does that mean for them, especially also if they're ELL students, by the time they get to middle school and then to high school, there's economic repercussions as well. So it really speaks to the overall attainment and life paths that you know, are shaped early on. And sorry, my voice is going away a little bit, but yeah, I think literacy is the most urgent need that I see to leave, you know, for the next board that has these multiple twigs, you know, like growing out of the tree that really is the core of our district. Or branches, that's what I meant to say, sorry. I thought ramas, so branches.
I'd like to amplify a little bit what President Hernandez-Jarvis just said, because, you know, in the reading that we got, when you came to Long Beach, you just seem to have turned the reading situation around essentially overnight at 3rd grade. You know, we've had a roadmap for 4 years that calls for everyone reading by the time they leave the 3rd grade. And we haven't, frankly, made a lot of progress on that. So I'm kind of struck by that contrast.
Sure. Just a little bit of backstory that isn't in the case. I had an experience in my first year as superintendent that just slapped me in the face. So I had done WASC,
Mr. Cohn, I'm sorry, we're missing part of what you're sharing with us. Your audio cut off.
Now that you're superintendent, would you? Okay. All right.
Okay, we can hear you again.
So, okay, so yeah, so Wes asked me if I would chair a typical accreditation visit. And I said, no, now that I'm superintendent, I'm said, how about the adult school program at the federal prison at Terminal, which is about minutes away from Long Beach. So I said, okay, I'll do it. So I walked into this prison and when I sat down and talked to them about what had happened to them when they were in school, to a man system. And
Okay, Mr. Cohn, we see
can you hear me now?
We see your video. We can hear you again, yes. It cut out a lot.
There's some things we could try. Maybe you could move closer to your router or modem. You could also try with your video off for a minute, see if that takes up less bandwidth.
That may work.
Okay. Anyway, can you hear me?
We can hear you now, yeah.
Okay, bottom line, I am floored by all of these inmates in a real prison telling me they went to public schools, but they never learned to read. And so when the opportunity came to take shortcuts with regard to the law, they took them, and they ended up, you know, with under the federal mandatory sentencing, some of them 20 years, that sort of thing. And so I was just completely blown. Have to get out of this, get after this issue of reading. So that was the moment that literacy and early literacy just grabbed me by the throat. And
I don't see Mr. Cohn anymore. Is he in the meeting? Mr. Duffy?
He's there. I think he froze again.
Okay. Would it be, do you think it could help if Mr. Cohn rejoins the meeting? Mr. Cohn, would you be able to do that? Sometimes that helps with Zoom when it's having glitches like that or connectivity issues. Sometimes that helps. I apologize to everybody who's with us right now. Let's see, we're gonna try to get Mr. Cohn connected with us again soon.
Well, I'm trying to communicate with him also via text.
Thank you.
Or we can see if he can just call in by phone. That's another way.
You can try that.
I believe he is back.
Sorry, my
Great.
connection is very unstable. Sorry. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
let's get in to other board members and the things that need to be improved.
Thank you. Mr. Duffy, could we share the document, please? Thank you. On the screen.
Okay, I'll go next. It's funny, I also wrote down the third grade literacy reading level because it's just such a difficult issue, but it's so important. And yeah, that's one thing that needs really needs improvement. That's a big one. I would also say communication. Oftentimes, I've heard people say, you know, they didn't know about certain things, or they feel like they're out of the loop. And needs to be some like employees feeling like they're not getting information until last minute kind of things. You know, it's not a real big thing, but it's kind of consistent and annoying for a lot of people. So that could be improved, I think. And when I was reading also the document you sent, I really like that you had a philosophy of education that you share with people. And, you know, I think that's what helped you to achieve all those goals. You had people buy into the same philosophy of education. We don't have that. We don't have that at all. And that's a problem. That's a big problem in achieving any kind of goal, because people have totally different ideas about education. So that's not shared. And quite honestly, the lack of some kind of decorum, I guess, behavior, not, you know, as a teacher, when I look at it as adults not modeling good behavior, simple respect, courtesy, oftentimes that just goes by the wayside. And it's disturbing to me because I know children are watching, you know, and we model good behavior that we want to see, regardless of, you know, how you feel. You still need to model that good behavior. And the other thing is, too, and it's kind of a part of that, or both of those things, is, you know, I've been on this board for 2 years now. And when I read how one of the things you always had was a stable board, and I don't think I've experienced that at all. And that's unfortunate. You know, I don't know how you improve that, but well, there's going to be a new board. Maybe they will be more stable. I don't know, but so those are the things that kind of come up, and I guess trust building needs to be improved also. I know there's people that resist it; they don't want to trust anybody, but all of these are the things, the communication, the philosophy, the trust are the things that help children learn. And because we as adults come together with common goals, we work together and we achieve those. But when the adults can't get along with each other, you're not helping children at all. In fact, you're doing the opposite. So that's kind of what I think needs to be improved. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll go next. I would add that I think there's quite a number of areas for improvement. And one of the things to realize with me is I don't ever think you ever get to where you don't need improvement ever. I think even high performing systems always have room for improvement, but there are some significant areas for us that I think we still have a number of missing pieces. I do agree, and that was one of the reasons that I know a focus for me when I got on this board was in fact third grade reading and what that meant. The challenge I think has been one, never our children, never the high hopes that our communities have for our children, but just the inability to find the alignments within our system and the resources that were going to help us get there, and the willingness to follow a vision that would get us there. For example, my sense of what we needed was one of a sense of morale and support for the educators in our district. We had what was in many ways a revolving door. As you know, it's something an issue at a number of high needs schools. It's an epidemic at high needs schools that's been documented, where you have a constant turnover and instability in teacher staff. And we had that issue. So how do you get to third grade literacy when you have a constant turnover and destabilization happening at schools? On top of that, we had various curriculums that really we hadn't figured out, are those the right approaches that we need for the majority of the students we're trying to teach literacy to. So the board at some point realized that we should take a chance and go big on a different kind of reading curriculum. Well, that became another struggle. But the good thing is we had relationships, and we had a set of a teachers union that really got behind that. But you have to be able to have resources to provide the supports for that staff to feel they understand and they have what they need. On top of that, we also recognize that social emotional supports are very important. So we have a whole set that we're working on. So I feel like we've been doing these little pieces of the work to get to better outcomes for our system, but transformation is long and hard and unfortunately under-resourced. But we did invest in prioritizing a positive school climate, and what does it mean to change our expectations for all our students. We're adding on that the anti-racist conversations and professional development that we've added, so we keep growing. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking, and there are generations of students that are continuing to go through each grade and they still haven't learned how to read in some ways. So that's the dilemma. On top of it, funding has been something we were fighting for, and local control funding formula finally looked like that might be a way to get some more funding, but what it did is it brought us up closer after 5 years to 2007 levels of funding. And so we're a high needs district, so it was great to have all those supports come back into the system, but what did it mean to align them then with our vision? On top of that, we have an identity problem within our district of who exactly are our students. The majority of our students are Latino, 1/3 are English learners. And we have a long history of a significant number of African American students. At one point, we were serving the most African American students in all of Contra Costa County. We never galvanized what it meant to have that responsibility and how we could be at the forefront of prioritizing what were the ways we were going to make a difference with that set of students, and to be able to demonstrate that we're committed to their success. So there's a lot of improvement. And the last thing is we never really got our data systems in place because we have an antiquated school system. I don't know if you've been to our district office. I think it was probably built in 1920. And there's just, to me, a tremendous amount of work that layered in with some of the other challenges that folks have talked about. I think in many ways our children just didn't have a chance, or still don't have a chance unless people really start getting clear about what truly is the work that we need to do, and what are the systems that we need to make it happen, what are the supports, and how do we galvanize the goodwill of the community, who I think has always been there, despite there are some voices who really, even in the fiscal challenges we've had, some people continue to believe it was better for us to fall off a cliff financially and let the state take us over, as if that was going to solve all the problems that I just laid out. So those are all improvements that remain a set of work for the next board to continue to focus on.
Thank you. Any other areas for improvement?
Mr. Cohn, and that's still for in general, right? Improvement generally, not for governance?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
So I'd like to talk a little bit more about the communication item that came up a little bit earlier. So from my perspective, we're often sort of behind the curve and we're reacting to things that happen rather than being proactive about making sure everybody knows things that are coming and being really clear about how to impact them. And on kind of a strictly a board level, I felt like, you know, we get things brought to us for approval, and sometimes they're a complete surprise and they're major changes. I mean, we had a conversation about converting some of our schools to K-8s, I think it was earlier this year, and it was a complete surprise to the board. And it was a complete surprise to the community. Some people knew about it, some didn't. And that kind of, to me, that goes back into the, like, we need to be more proactive in our communications and make sure people know things are coming so they can be better prepared for them.
Anything else on areas for improvement that you want to get up there? As an outsider, can someone say
Mr. Cohn, we couldn't hear the last part of your question. You're back. We can see you now.
I don't know if you heard me. I was asking, I'm an outsider. Can someone say more about?
Sorry, Mr. Cohn, we couldn't hear again. We heard as an outsider, can someone tell me more about or say more about? Okay, you're back. So we heard as an outsider, can someone say more about?
Adult decorum and adult trust. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. And this is specifically to the question, to the category about improvement in general, not about governance.
Yeah, I brought that up. And I guess I was really kind of shocked. I came from the classroom, retired, and then, you know, you always try to teach children and model for children how to behave, you know, what to do in a crisis, what to do in any situation, and that you're the adult, you know, in the room, and that every child is watching you, you know. I'm flashing back the first time a young person said to me, you know, I want to be just like you. And the responsibility of that is very powerful. And so I always think about that. There's somebody watching me quietly, listening, and seeing how I am going to conduct myself in whatever situation comes up. And I see people just, I don't know, adults being so rude and disrespectful, you know, at all different levels. And they think it's okay for some reason. They just, and I don't know what you could do about that exactly. But it's there, it's been there, it's not changed a bit. You know, you just kind of know that some people are going to behave that way, and it's unfortunate. And that's from my perspective. I don't know, maybe it doesn't bother other people, but it bothers me. So that was kind of where that came from.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, and board member Laura, were you responding on adult decorum and adult trust?
Yes, I was.
Okay, all right,
Did you hear that?
thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Why don't we move on to governance and what you're most proud of?
I have a question about that. Do you mean governance, the boards, how the board governs, or how the district governs?
The board. The board.
How the board governs. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And you asked what are we the most proud of, right? That's
Right. Yeah. What are your board meetings long? Are they focused?
and I will save my comments about the second part of the question you asked right now for the what stands out as, or not what stands out, what needs the most work, because definitely that needs the most work. But I think I will start with what I am the most proud of from, you know, the governance perspective of our board. I think that we started our term together in December 2018 officially. I think that the first year that we had together, pre-pandemic, we had a full year and a few months. And I think that we really continued that tradition that I'm not sure if other board members had done this before, but I know that with Trustee Panas, when he was the president of the board, he started the tradition of having a talking piece. And before, when we could touch things shared by other people, we used to pass that along at the board meetings, and that served as something that I think respected the turns and kept people from talking over each other and shouting. So I think that was something very helpful. And also pre-COVID times, I want us to remember that we started to move closer to the audience. So before, when our term began, everything was pushed back onto the stage. And so where we have the meetings at Dijon Middle School, the stage is very much back, and it's kind of obscure, hard to see. So we started moving closer and closer, and that was part of a conversation with board members and with staff, and just asking, I want to give credit to everybody who was part of that and who was part of moving the chairs, moving everything around, even the cameras to make it work, and to Trustee Panas for really pushing, everybody to have these conversations and inviting people in to talk about what does it feel like when we sit closer to the public, closer to the audience. And so I think that brought a sense of community, I think, not just to the board, but to the public too, because they could actually see our faces. We were not in, obscurity in the back with everybody on stage. It was like, boom, here are the 5 board members, here's the superintendent, the student trustees, these are the folks who are up here, and these are the cabinet staff on the side. So it just, I think it really brought the audience and the board closer together. And I really miss that, in this work. And I would like to say that something that I think has been working well is that we are able to stay connected with the community and our Zoom meetings, and that we initially had Zoom comments read, and we were open to trying that, seeing if that could work so that we could reduce the amount of Zoom bombing that was happening and prevent any kind of, just any kind of offensive language, being present during the meeting. And so we tried that, and then we decided to go back to live comments. So I think that we were able to adjust, and we're flexible with our means of communication and feedback during this time too.
And did someone has said about education that it's really important in terms of symbols in education, and did moving the days down to the floor, was that?
Mr. Cohn, we couldn't hear after.
Behind that?
We couldn't hear the last part of your question. When you asked moving the dais to the front or closer to the audience.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Moving the days down to the floor, did parents, public, community recognize that in terms of the symbolic nature of something like that?
I would say, yeah. I remember, and Trustee Panas, feel free to jump in as well, but I would say yes, from having some discussions with community members when it was happening and in early 2019, and what that meant, what it meant to be closer, and just that people could see our faces. Yeah.
That was my experience too. I can't speak for other board members, but I had a lot of people telling me that it's great that you're down here and you're at eye level with us. There were some complaints that people couldn't see us as well, but to me, the complaints I got, those, about not being able to see us as well, those were far outnumbered by people saying, we really like you putting yourself at our level and not being off inaccessible on the stage.
So I'll go ahead and go next. I think one of the things I'm most proud of is that when I started on this board, and one of the things I want to make sure that we add to the conversation is that this board has had turnover every cycle. Unlike other boards where you have folks who might be a majority serving for 20 years together on a school board, this board, when I joined it, had a different composition. 2 years later, there was a different composition. And 2 years after that, there was a different composition. And so I think it's very hard to establish some of the things that folks talked about we need when you're constantly bringing in and having new people come in with what that means to prioritize how you create decorum and commit to it when everybody has a different perspective, opinion, and political agenda. The challenge I've had, the thing I'm most proud of though, is that the reason I bring this up is that throughout that change in board, one thing that happened that I'm most proud of is we added students to our board since my tenure. And that has been the best thing that I think I'm most proud of, is that their voices is actually what's kept this board, no matter what the composition was every 2 years, quite honest, I think, in lots of ways, because they were clear and able to articulate what they were experiencing in our district while we were the quote unquote adults trying to solve the problems. And I do think that in terms of challenges, there's just a difference of opinion on how our commitment to decorum in a democratic process works. And I do think that when folks choose to ignore Rosenberg's rules and choose to browbeat folks and not be conscious because they are entitled, because it is in fact a constitutionally protected activity to speak as long as you want, for whatever you want, however you want, to even go outside of the context of what's being addressed, and influence and shape and frame whatever you think the issues are to create movement or change or influence on the board. I think that's happened quite a bit as well, in ways that made it hard to create trust as well. I think there was the use of social media in ways that was used as a purposeful mechanism to create discord outside instead of with board members, in ways that were meant to find a way to jam up, to slow down, to throw a tantrum in some ways of how to move stuff forward, of what the vision was that the board was constantly trying to create consistency over. You had some board members who chose not to show up to retreats. And yes, everybody maybe had legitimate reasons, but there was never a recognition of what their absence meant to that work, even if they were legitimate. And I think that added to it as well. So I think for the most part, this is mostly a debrief for future board members to think about what it means to serve students and what the hard work is beyond running a campaign, that the hard work of governance is truly where leadership is demonstrated, not necessarily how you choose to do your politics or win or lose or campaigns or whatever.
May I interrupt for just a second, Mr.
Would you predict that the change in how board members are elected will bring greater?
I think we just heard some of what you mentioned.
Hey, Carl, I think.
Do you think that the change in the way board members are elected will bring greater stability to the board? Did that come through?
Yes.
We heard that.
Well, I mean, I think it can, in the sense that there'll be a smaller number of constituents that can easily hold their elected for their area accountable for how they're governing, how they're conducting themselves. I think there will always be, in the nature of local offices, potential turnover. I think what also needs to happen within our community is they need to decide who do you really believe is worthy of serving as a school board member and has the capacity to address what the complex challenges are that you want them to have. It's a similar conversation like we're having right now nationally. Who's fit to have what I believe is the most important job that you can have in public office? And it's not the highest one. It's not executive office. It's not state level. It's local, and it's this particular local office. You touch the future, you shape the future, you work for the future. And I think that's part of the issue as well, is that there is the potential to provide stability if folks figure out how to hold their electeds accountable, and I think that's going to be easier to do. And also an opportunity to have greater representation within local communities, because we'll have voices from throughout our school district represented on our school board in terms of geographically.
Yeah, I'm really struggling with this one because it goes back to what I said about not having a stable board. There's not a whole lot that I can, I like, we had students, I'm proud of that as well. But I felt that there was a lack of even desire to work as a team, to collaborate. It did feel like, you were part of, something that happened, that it affected the Hewlett-Packard situation. I mean, that was one of the kinds of, I'm not proud of that at all. If that's the way, people think that a board should be governing. And so I can't find a whole lot that I feel proud about this, the work and the governance. I do have some great relationships, some very smart people, and I like that. But as a board, as a team, yeah, I can't think of anything. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Cohn, for clarification, are we also simultaneously right now talking about the areas that need the most work?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I can think of a few. I think that definitely actually wanting to have committees that are efficient and are focused on getting the work done. I think that when we started as a board, I learned that there were a lot of committees that were inactive and hadn't had meetings and had been suspended. And that was confusing to me. And so I wanted to dive a little deeper into that and the history of committees and the purpose of it. And something that I hear a lot, or that I heard a lot, was that there's too many meetings, too many committees, but the work wasn't actually happening. So I think that having committees that are effective, that are transparent, and I think that work collaboratively with stakeholders too, especially seeing parents and community members as professionals with the intention of actually improving the district, not any other, intentions. And I think that, for example, the DLI Advisory Committee was started this year, and it's almost working as an ad hoc committee to talk about like the plans for dual language immersion in the district. But in reality, I think that it shouldn't be ad hoc, because it's an ongoing, issue in education. How do we build biliteracy, a long-term plan for DLI in the district? And the CT, sorry, I'm running out of breath. The CT committee, that's also kind of something that came on our radar last year, and we had and I just want to make this point to illustrate it. So the CT task force presented some of the work that they did at a meeting last fall, and it was kind of like a surprise because nowhere could I find that there was a committee doing this work. And so the demographics represented by the CTE committee are not representative of the demographics of the actual students enrolled in those programs. So the task force is overly white, and the actual students enrolled in CTE are not. They're the majority Latinx and African American. So I call that out. And as far as I know, nothing has been done to address that. And I would, take responsibility that I haven't pursued that as fervently as I should. But that's something that I would like to say. If we're going to have these committees making big decisions and getting grants, like, what does it look like to act as a gate opener, not a gatekeeper, and to have transparency? and be under the guidance of the board too, and have regular reports. Sorry, my breathing has been bad since last week with the fires, and teaching all day too. So I think that the committee work is something that the board needs to improve. The next board is going to have that task before them. And I think building authentic relationships with board members and with the staff, like actually seeing each other as professionals, not as casuals, as friends, as like, oh yeah, like, you know, because I think when that starts to happen, I think like as a person of color, as an immigrant, you know, I really felt like my part here as a board that's the majority people of color. I think that we have to address things as professionals and be seen as professionals, and having that same attitude back toward us, not just us to other people, but other people who are doing the work in the district, to see everybody as professionals, and not like, oh, it's okay to turn in this late because I already told them. But it's like the expectation is to have authentic diligence, and to have things be of importance and treated as such. And the last thing I think is, sorry, I'm not using my inhaler today, and I'm really running out of breath. So I would say that building a professional relationship and decorum, I think that in my experience has been that there's a lot of politeness for the sake of complacency. And I would say for the next board to really speak to that truth to power, and being authentic when you disagree while still being respectful, but not polite for the sake of being polite. And I'm not saying to shout. I'm not saying to get in shouting matches, but that the expectation is respect, but that you will also model the behavior of speaking truth, right? Not wanting to be respectable but fake respectable, or having a pretend respectability, and then sending harassing emails to fellow board members, posting things online, calling and sending you emails that are like, this is FOIA stuff, this is public documents, like people can request to see that, and having that and saying that we want to collaborate, but then in reality approaching slander or libel through these communications. So I think that thinking that there are people who serve and are connected to conspiracy theories, I just think that's so unhealthy, and it doesn't help us to get the work done. So I would say that to the next board, to build a culture of trust, and to actually understand each other's intentions and where you're coming from. And I'm gonna run out of air. I'm sorry, I have to walk away a little bit, get some fresh air, and then I'll be right back.
Can I jump in for just a moment?
And I take it that
Hey, Carl, we might want to have you try calling in just on the phone, because we keep losing you and losing some of the flow of the discussion. Would you be willing to try that? And I will text you, if you can hear me, the call-in phone number.
yes, I heard you, and I will do that.
You might have it already texted from Bobby or Robert Jordan, who works with us also. You can also try both ways with keeping your Zoom screen on but no audio, see if that helps, or go off the video completely when you connect by phone.
Enter your meeting ID, followed.
So Mr. Duffy, Stephanie Garcia Avalos says has been waiting to get admitted to the meeting for a while.
Okay. Bobby, can you check?
Enter your participant ID followed by pound. Otherwise, just press pound to continue. You
Waiting.
have joined the meeting as an attendee and will be muted throughout the meeting. This meeting is being recorded.
Right. So now just turn your, probably mute your audio.
I think I'm,
Uh-oh.
I think we can still hear you, Mr. Cohn. Can you hear us?
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
I think you're going to have to turn off your audio on the computer. If you lower the volume on the computer. Okay, and you can turn on your microphone on your phone by clicking *6, I think. Or by just unmuting it.
Board, and I actually don't see student board member Stephanie Garcia Avila. I don't see her in the attendee or the panelist pool.
Okay.
Do we know if she's logged in through her account?
It may be Araceli Margo.
I will
That's-
ask that question, yeah.
It's Araceli Margo.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure, but they raised their hand right now when you asked that, so I'm not sure.
So on Mr. Cohn, Bobby, I think he's an attendee right now on his phone. He can still talk, which is fine. But I think we also see him up in the panelist.
Yes, that's her.
And board, I would like to ask Board Clerk Lara to facilitate the rest of the meeting. I'm gonna stay here, but I need to shorten my speaking times because I'm running out of air. Thank you.
Yes. Fine.
And so that name is Stephanie Garcia Avila. If we can admit her.
Sorry, board member Panis. I still don't see her in the attendee pool.
Tom, what was the name?
Araceli was part of it, I think.
Oh, I think it's Araceli Margo, potentially.
Yes, yeah.
So that's an attendee that could go to panelist. There we go. Great. All right, we got one done. Let's try to figure out Mr. Cohn.
He should be able to talk now. He should be able to talk via his phone.
Mr. Cohn, do you have your phone? Your video is frozen. You are muted. Oh, that's probably muted from the video. And
Does he need to get off through his computer entirely? Probably.
He shouldn't if he muted it. Up there he is, but he's muted now.
Okay, there's a phone number. Bullet, that's him.
Yeah, he should be able to speak. He's unmuted.
Mr. Cohn, are you there?
We can't hear him.
I think you need to promote his 562 number.
You can't promote a phone number.
Although the 562 number is already in the top panel.
Yes, it is. Mr. Cohn, we see you now, and
Oh,
how's the phone working? No sound yet. Still no sound.
should we just try the computer then?
Yeah, can we ask him to log off, log back on? And when he logs on, to make sure his video is off, turn his video off. That might help.
Or do you want to just turn the video off right now? Carl, if you can hear me, why don't we have you just turn off your video,
You did that.
unmute, and let's try to continue to talk through the computer.
How's that?
We can hear you, but there's an echo, it sounds like.
Can you hang the phone up now, Mr. Carl?
Yeah, it sounds like the phone is working now. If he mutes the computer, he should
Yes.
be fine.
There we
How's
go.
that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Better.
Okay, where did we leave off?
Can you
We'll get the screen back up.
can you hear me?
We can
Okay.
hear you, yes.
Can you hear us?
All right. I think I'm going. All right, let me turn up my speaker. Okay. How's this?
Sounds very clear now.
Okay. I think we may have gotten there.
And I think,
Okay. You can hear me?
yes, we can hear you.
All right. So,
I think, I believe it was Mr. Phillips, were you about to speak?
I was, but all this technical difficulties, that's the Lord telling me to be quiet. So I'm gonna let you guys go on.
Kind of lose the mood, huh? Maybe it'll come back. Okay.
okay.
So we were
So
governance.
I think, yeah, one of the questions I had was with regard to, I presume these meetings are archived?
The board meetings?
Right. So some of that valuable content with regard to this will be available for folks to either see or hear with regard to what needs work, with regard to governance, that sort of thing.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Why don't we move on to the Long Beach case and get reactions and or questions with regard to that. This obviously was a long time ago under different circumstances. One of the things you should probably know as I approached the superintendency, there were a number of things as I observed what was going on in large urban districts that had an impact on me, and I wanted to do things differently. So what I observed back when was that it seemed like superintendents and their executive staffs, you can all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Were spending almost all of their time on the care and feeding of the school board. They would sit in the central office for long periods of time, preparing for board meetings, then sitting at lengthy meetings, and then spending, again, extraordinary amounts of time debriefing and following up on all the things that happened at those board meetings. And one of the things I concluded is that if you worked in schools and you loved the status quo, having the superintendent and his or her staff bogged down with the school board created an opportunity for people who weren't really or didn't want to focus on the challenges of underserved kids to basically say, you know, superintendent and that staff's never going to get to us because the board is taking up all of their time. So as a rookie superintendent, I laid that out for the school board. And I said, what could we do differently that respected your needs as elected officials, but also freed up my staff and myself to really get out there, roll up our sleeves, and spend the vast majority of time focused in an organized, systematic way on improving what goes on in the schools. So this grand bargain of board workshops. Now, when I tell people like you that we actually stopped what we were doing every 90 days, took 2.5 days to focus on the direction of the school system. But once we were done, for the next 90 days, superintendent, executive staff, they're out there. They're working on delivering improvements in the schools. And so what we worked out was this quarterly board workshop experience, 2 days of workshop, an additional half day, a mini evaluation of the superintendent of schools. And part of that mini evaluation, again, as a rookie, I observed veteran superintendents basically saying, you know, the once a year evaluation, we sit down in July to do that, and a board member will say, you remember that community breakfast that we were at back in You've been holding on to this for all of this time. And so the idea was every 90 days to take stock of where all six people are. And what the net effect of all this was to build trust. So that the regular Board of Education meetings conducting the business of the third largest school district in California, twice a month, we did that in about an hour's time. Now, I am not in any way, shape, or form suggesting that every community is the same and that every community could adopt that. But our approach was the only way we are ever going to get to genuine improvement in the schools is for us to roll up our sleeves and get out there and do it, and not spend all of our time preparing for board meetings, sitting that comes from that. So that was the grand bargain. 2.5 days, 4 times a year, got the undivided attention, our undivided attention as staff. But once that workshop is done, we're not going to be obviously, we had this new structure elected by area. But it actually turned out that the fact that the schools were getting all of the long overdue attention, parents, public, everybody said, we like that. We like the fact that you're out here, you're visible. If you've got schools that have been underperforming for years, you're actually working on improving.
Can I ask a follow-up question real quick, Dr. Cohn? One of the things that I've noticed is folks, with all the energy you bring as a new board member, you come with all these great ideas. And in what ways do you recommend that board members learn about the history of who's led their organization, what decisions have been made, what has been pursued in the past, and how that has implications for what you're going to be facing, even as you try to create the new structures, address the issues that are important, is how much, because it does take time for these things to happen. So I feel like when I got on board, for every leader that was here in our system, their footprint is still, and handprint, and the implications of that is still within the system. structure on how we're trying to address issues and decisions they made, what their impact was. And so when you're trying to address things from a governance perspective, what is the appropriate way to acknowledge that you're a reflection of everything that's come before you in terms of the issues you're trying to address? I don't know if he heard me, but I guess the question I'm asking is, there were choices made about what curriculum, how to staff, how to compensate, how to organize school families, what to invest in, what not to invest in, what to do. Just same way the implication down the road when somebody, when we decided as a district to go and invest in one-for-one technology, it had an implication that we were ready down the line. But I think in many ways, the challenges we face are a reflection of things that happen before you get on the board. And so I'm just curious in terms of what is the role of board members to figure out how to unpack that, and also for accountability in relation to what does it mean to try to drive change when you're actually working within what's been left for you.
Well, hopefully we can get him back on. I mean, I do think it continues to speak to the role of the board, and how to stay in that policy place, so that you can, you know, stay there and feel like you're not getting lost in different areas. Let me see.
I mean, I think there's I'm sure a difference of opinion in what the role of the board is, but I guess what I'm trying to say is we've had multiple soups, and everything in our system is a reflection of everybody who's come before us. Everything. Every board member, every superintendent, every cabinet member. And so my question is more, what are the assets that can be taken from that knowledge to help new board members decide how they want to approach their governance, knowing that those are things that they didn't control, but acknowledge that they're there.
I do not see Mr. Cohn on here at all.
He's in the call-in group again.
Oh, okay.
So I think Bobby needs to unmute him.
Okay. Okay. Is he the five,
Yeah,
six? Okay.
Mr. Cohn, if you can hear me, I think it's *6 to unmute your phone. I also just text you another number that you should be able to call in as a panelist. So hopefully we can avoid that. Mr. Cohn? Mr. Cohn, can you hear us? *6 to unmute your phone.
His phone is still not unmuted.
Mr. Cohn, if you can unmute your phone.
have logged off.
He's now logged back on, but he's inside the attendees side.
Okay. Still not seeing him.
He's back in the panelists now.
Oh, there he
Mr.
goes.
Cohn, maybe if you want to try to unmute.
He just needs to unmute.
Mr. Cohn, if you can hear me, if you're going to unmute.
There, okay.
Okay.
Mr. Cohn, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. Trustee Cuevas, did you want to kind of summarize what you were saying?
I guess what I'm asking is what you're recommending, and I agree, is that people commit to actually a way to build their governance team and feed that and cultivate it in a healthy way, in a positive way, in the way organizations that are effective do. And my question is that how does that get complemented by the notion of when you have folks who are elected to school board, everybody comes with their own idea of what they want to do, what they think needs to happen, and also most of what your context you're working with is your system in real time as you encounter it for the first time is a reflection of everybody and everything that's come before you as far as how efficient and how well it's serving students. So I'm just curious in terms of how do you balance all three of those things: new energy, the desire to get folks committed to building their governance team, knowing that everybody has a different perspective, including an opinion on whether there's accountability and who's accountable for how you find things when you get there.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I think the key is building trust as sort of the underlying glue. Now, one of the things that's probably extraordinary about my experience in Long Beach, 4 out of 5 of the school board members who hired me stayed for all 10 years. So you didn't have the type of, sort of where because the trust was built, there was a lot of patience and a lot of attention on putting in place those things that were going to pay off big time in terms of student performance. But it wasn't shopping around with, I promise you, I can turn this around in 2 or 3 years. The truth is, and this sometimes makes people nervous when I talk about it and national conferences with school boards, that sort of thing, the big gains in student achievement in Long Beach came years 5 through 10 of my time there. And the problem with the political election cycle, that board could have said, this guy's charming, he's likable, but we're going to have to shop him out for somebody else because the numbers just aren't moving in the way that they should be. They basically said, we trust this person. We see him putting the kinds of changes in place that are going to pay off in the long haul. And so we're going to stick with him. And that sort of, you know, it's a political gamble in a sense, but that sort of gamble paid off with the student performance really taking off years 5 through 10. And sometimes the political cycle doesn't allow for that kind of patience. And I would argue that it was the underlying trust that helped to make that work. And I don't pretend to know the politics of West Contra.
Thank you. I appreciate your perspective. I just want us to do a quick time check, Superintendent, because I think we're at 7 already. It's my suggestion.
Yep. We wanted to make sure, and is Carl still with us?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I'm still here.
Yep. We wanted to make sure there was some time for the board to ask any more questions or talk any more about the learnings from Long Beach and this very unique structure that they had, where there was this commitment to basically 90-minute board meetings, but this quarterly check-in time. I mean, one of the questions I had really quickly, and then we'll see if any board members have some, and then the last activity we have is really to talk about the transition to the new board, and sort of gets at your question, Trustee Cuevas, you know, which is I think a good thing to talk about, because I've been here through one election cycle and we haven't really talked about how that transition would work. But I wondered, Carl, like in having these very focused, efficient board meetings, especially in the beginning when you were trying to get maybe find your rhythm there, how did you know what not to do? Which is a struggle for us. Our board meetings, you know, go 6 or 5, 6, 7 hours. And it seems like we're really struggling to know like what should be on there and what shouldn't. And how are you guys able to take so many things off?
So that's an excellent question. The had a great general counsel who was there and had been there. And basically he said, believe it or not, in terms of ed code legal requirements, here's what you need to do to conduct the business of the third largest school system. The other thing that complemented that, and this is really an important point that speaks to Board Chair Hernandez-Jarvis's point, we had a very efficient and effective committee structure so that those committees met, HR, business, and finance, instruction, 3 committees. And basically, they met usually on the morning or early afternoon of board day. And so anything that was tremendous board respect for those committees. And so if those committees wanted to pull something, then the chair of that committee pulled it from consent, that sort of thing. But a very effective committee structure helped to facilitate those relatively brief twice a month. And then the general counsel basically saying, you know, here's what the ed code actually requires you to take up. And the interesting thing about it, enough, from the districts around us, there would be a superintendent and a board president sitting in the audience, observing to see if the business of the third largest school district in the state could actually be conducted in such a short amount of time.
Mr. Cohn, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So, one, you're saying a big reason that you guys were able to do your work so efficiently is because you actually had a general counsel for your school district, like an in-house counsel. Is that what you're saying?
We did, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a great idea.
Yeah.
So thank you.
And he,
Can't hear you, sir.
It's coming back.
yeah. Were you going to add on, Mr. Phillips?
I did. I had one more question. You're talking about your committee structures,
Sure.
and you said you had, I think you called it an instruction committee.
We did.
What was that? Can you talk about that for a minute?
Basically, all of the items that were going to be
Lost you again, Mr. Cohn.
and so sometimes the overall board agenda has a lot of instruction items. So that instruction committee would take up in advance those items.
So, Mr. Cohn, you're kind of going out. I wanted to just ask you a question. This is a board subcommittee, right?
That's right.
Okay. You know, that sounds a lot like the academic subcommittee that we used to have that did those things and that we got rid of it. So I think that's a great idea too. So thank you. That was interesting.
Sure. The other thing about
Can
our
I add,
general counsel.
Mr. Cohen, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Was it a board committee or a staff-led committee? Because the academic one that we got rid of was staff-led.
All three of our committees were board-led committee, but there was a staff person assigned to each of those committees, but they were board-led.
But they were led by board-led, right? Because I remember at one point Nia Rashichi led our instructional, our academic committee. And do board members set the agenda? For your academic committee, did board members set the agenda, or did staff set the agenda for those?
Basically, they worked together. Again, this kind of trust that developed. So the legwork was done by staff in terms of backup materials, that sort of thing. But all three of those committees, HR, Business and Finance, Instruction, were led by school board members.
Right. And I remember we tried to start because we thought it should be school board members working with Ms. Richichi. And then we actually decided to move away from a staff-led one and have it be a board-led one with staff. And then the board voted as a whole to kill our committees that year. And then we never were able to implement after that for lots of the reasons that you discussed. But the other question I have very quickly is your general counsel. Did your general counsel report to your board? Did the board feel they were that general counsel was the board's general counsel separate from the superintendent, or was that the district's general counsel?
You know, the general counsel ultimately worked for the school board. And this issue, I'm laughing, this issue always comes up, right? When you want to get rid of a superintendent, who does the general counsel actually work for? We understood that the general counsel ultimately worked for the board, but again, so much of this is about building adult trust. So I fully trusted the general counsel, but I knew from day one that ultimately the general counsel worked for the board.
Right.
and when it came time to get rid of me,
right.
that's what the general counsel
right.
Would
right.
need to do.
And was the general counsel already in place before that core set of board members that were consistent?
Yes, he was.
None of those board members hired that general counsel.
That's correct. They inherited him.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
And you know, my thoughts, I don't know if this is relevant or not, but I think general counsels are valuable in the sense of you don't have to worry about billable hours, that sort of thing. This person is employed by the school district, and a lot of, this is just my opinion with regard to California districts, a lot of districts think, well, we're not big enough to have our own general counsel. But if you actually look at the legal bills at the end of the year, how much is being spent shopping everything to law firms that are heavy into billable hours, you can actually save money by having a general counsel. But that's your business. I'm not.
Mr. Cohn, Tom Panis, I have a couple of questions for you about committees also. You know, in the Harvard study, it says there was 5. So did you start with 3 and go to 5, or did you start with 5 and go to 3?
That's an excellent question. The Harvard study may not have gotten that right. There was HR, 1, there was Business and Finance, and there was Instruction. That was it.
Okay. And in the Harvard study, it also says that with 2 board members present, they could meet privately with the staff. I mean, would that still comply with the Brown Act today? Because it sounds like these were not ad hoc committees; they were standing committees, and at least according to my understanding,
they were standing committees on the board.
Okay, so I guess the Brown Act has changed in that sense now. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Okay.
And Carl, you said those committees, they all met at the same time on the same morning?
Typically, if there was some sort of a challenge in terms of board coverage, they worked out the agreement. Let's say that Business and Finance wanted to meet on the Friday before a Tuesday board meeting. That was their business to decide. The staff person who manned that committee and the two board members who were on it.
Right, right.
Okay.
Can I ask real quick, Mr. Cohn, again, forgive me, because I know I read it, but it's, how many students did Long Beach have?
Long Beach at that time was a growing school district, and we were, you know, in the 90,000+ students, headed toward 100,000.
Got it. So your budget meant that you were able to make decisions like bring things in-house because you're able to cover that. And in doing that, you said you save money. Did most of these folks have the capacity to take on the complex legal issues that oftentimes people end up having an in-house?
No,
And then
so part of the general counsel. Right. Yeah. No, we actually, the general counsel was responsible for shopping various legal issues to law firms, but he did the scrutiny, the examination of those law firms. And, you know, we sometimes, because we had a good cause, we would sometimes get law firms that wanted to so yeah, some of our issues. One of the things that it's important to remember, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Long Beach was a very threatened community, one that was economically dying, overrun by gangs, and so it wasn't, you know, in the intervening years, all kinds of things have happened to build up the downtown, all that sort of thing. Back then, fundamental question was, is this gritty port city going to survive? This place that has become immigration central on the West Coast. McDonnell Douglas is leaving. The United States Navy says it's time to get out of here. So it was a very
We can't hear you, Mr. Cohn. I think he. Okay.
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Any other issues from the case that people want to raise?
I have one. What I read was that the way you got to the short meetings was that you had quarterly retreats.
Right.
And yeah, so that's something that stuck out to me. Those retreats are very important, and that's, I think, something that obviously helps and contributes to making those short meetings And that's such an important goal, because every time we stay late, I always just feel the disrespect we are showing to our parents, our community. And I just, I just can't believe people are that disrespectful to the community. But the quarterly retreats, it sounds like that would be something that could help. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Okay. I think that's it.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I think where we wanted to go next, and I don't know, Carl, are you still able to see the screen?
I am.
Okay. I mean, based on the conversations of what's going well, what's a struggle, based on the conversation of governance, positives, and places to improve, thinking about the case study and some of Carl's comments, how do you want to, and I think Trustee Cuevas asked this, I'll ask this first question, Carl, but please help facilitate this section. How do you want to transmit the goals of the current work, whether you see that as the roadmap or something else that we're working on, to the new board members, right? We know definitively there'll be 3 board members are not returning, and 2 potentially are. So I think that's a good question for the board. We've Ms. Lara and President Hernandez will have been here for 2 years. Ms. Cuevas, 6 years, right? That's a significant body of work. And yeah, I guess, Carl, I don't know if you want to frame it, but I know, you had mentioned to me, this elections coming, et cetera, and the importance of transferring information, power between, old and new boards.
Right. Mr. Penn, that's one thing that I mentioned, Superintendent, if I may, is that there are various levels of tenure on this board. You have 6 years, 4 years, and 2 years. And that was my question. Everything a new board will inherit, whether it includes old members or not, will be a reflection of the energy of every one of those tenures, the good and the bad. And so just wondering, what does it mean, and how did you put systems in place as well so that the continued progress is maintained for the sake of the students and the systems outside of what gets lost with the switching out and in of those tenures?
Can I just, President, I'm sorry, Trustee Cuevas, because I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to ask if I could speak after you're done.
Yeah, I'm done.
So this is not new. There's an election every 2 years. There is a transition of power and leadership every 2 years. No one's ever built a wall around the White House or the school district and dug themselves in. We have an election in a few months, not a few months, in a few weeks. Actually, voting has already started. And I'm just going to say that, we all know that there's work to be done. There are 2 school board candidates, Ms. Jamila Smith-Bowles and Ms. Leslie Reckler, in the audience. I could see their names. We have Mr. Panis here on the board right now. We have myself. I am totally opposed to this board trying to, in my opinion, push its agenda onto the next board. This board is going to be voted out, almost all of us, in a couple of weeks. And I think that this is an overreach. And this is part of the reason I did not want to come this evening. So whatever systems this board tries to put in place to perpetuate itself after the election, I promise you, I will not support that. So you could spend all the time you want putting it in place, But when this new board comes in, whoever it is, whoever is part of that, I will work with them to actually move whatever it is this board and this district and staff wants to move. But I have absolutely no interest. We spent 20 minutes talking about how, and I was just listening, but we spent 20 minutes talking about how dysfunctional this board is and about people not being proud of things that were done, and the idea of trying to institutionalize what I heard some people basically describe as chaos is nonsense to me. And so I'm going to check out pretty soon, and you can all do that if you like, but I promise you, I mean, if you build bricks or you build a wall of bricks to try to keep this going, I will try to take those bricks back down and rebuild the wall with whoever is on the board come the transition.
Mr. Cohen, I think there's a perfect example of again, it's not seeking first to understand. One of the first principles of highly effective people that Dr. Covey talked about was seek first to understand. And I think the point being is we're talking about structures related to thinking about reflection points, retreats, things like that. And immediately it was assumed that there's a power grab. And nobody even mentioned that. So my sense is, again, a perfect example of what it means when folks bring their full selves to this work. And of course, it'll be decided on what a new board decides. I'm not talking about a board, I'm talking about students in this district and serving them. And what are the ways that we leave for whatever boards want to consider it. I think it's a huge assumption for people to just assume that they're going to be elected to this board, even if they think structurally there's no way they couldn't. And that speaks a lot as well. And so what we're talking about is, again, a clear evidence for everyone. It is recorded, as you've mentioned earlier, to see where the hangups were about creating trust. And wherever you go, there you are. That will remain when folks decide to bring that to their leadership. So my question again is, what is it that we can leave in an asset-based approach for new folks to think about what they want and what they don't want, and not assume the worst of intention, which is also part of what leads to mistrust.
Mr. Cohen?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I didn't see the discussion as putting anything in place as much as if this collective of 5 wanted to send a message to the new collective of 5, what would that be?
Is that what you, is that the next activity? What is the message this board would like to send to the next board?
That's how I viewed it.
Okay, okay. Well, I have some thoughts about that, and that the new board, I hope, will learn, work hard at building trust, being collaborative, and to work as a team as much as possible, and to find that common philosophy of education to get to agree upon, really, and to build upon. And that's, might not be easy, but I think that's what's going to go the farthest, is to build the trust, be collaborative, and find a common philosophy of education. That would be my message.
I guess my message would be that we need to keep kids at the top of everything we do. And if we're expecting something from the superintendent, we need to be crystal clear about that.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Phil.
I've gotten a chance to work in local and county government and the federal government for a moment. I don't think I've ever gotten a chance to work in the state government. And one of the things that I've seen, and I'm almost piggybacking on what something that Trustee Laura said and something that Mr. Panis said. What I feel, and I'm going to talk about how I feel, and this could be, this is not attributing this to anybody else, but this is what my experience has been. And I think there has been some of this here as well. You have staff members and you have elected officials. And sometimes there are turf wars, battles, whatever you want to call it. And this happens like at every level of government. So this is not specific to any area of government or level. And ideally, you don't want this to happen, but it does happen, and it plays out in different areas in different ways. And so if you want to push something, if you have maybe a shared philosophy like Trustee Laura said, or even if it's not a shared philosophy, but a shared project that you want to work on because you all think something is important. If there is, and this doesn't mean that everybody on the board has to agree with everybody every time, but if there is noticeable dissension, if you have like board members fighting with each other, particularly in front of staff, it creates openings for staff to ignore you because they know, like, and it's almost like if you have kids, I'm not saying staff or children, but like if you have kids, you know what I'm talking about. Like if mom and dad are like fighting and not getting along, you know, kid goes to mom or kid goes, staff members do that too. And so if you really want to move forward, in my opinion, and this is what I've seen, if you really want to move forward as an organization and as a board, you have to move not always together and not always agree on everything. I'm not saying that, but you really have to almost have a united front. So they know that, you know what, if you know, Phillips, you know, he's saying this, but we don't have to listen because we know if they get into a board meeting, he's going to fight with Panis. And then if Panis is saying this, we don't have to listen because we know if he gets in a meeting, he's going to fight with Laura. And they watch this. And this happens all over America at multiple levels of government. And that allows staff to not listen to you, to actually ignore you. To say things like, you know what, everybody's not going to agree, so I don't have to do it. And I know people may not think that this happens, but I've seen it. And I mean, I've seen it locally. I've seen it, you know, this is what happens. So that would be my recommendation. Is just for the betterment of the good, or even if that's the right phrase, I don't, maybe it's not, but to just work with each other like as much as possible and show like a united front as much as possible. And that may mean sometimes that it's not your issue. You know, if another trustee wants something, and you may not necessarily agree with what they're asking for, but it's not your biggest issue and it doesn't really bother you, say yes, right? Because doing that kind of thing actually gets people, you know, on the same page. And I think it's a courtesy. I mean, I'm saying extend courtesies to other people. Uh, and I think those kind of things build unity. And when staff sees the board acting that way, whether it's a board, a commission, what I'm telling you, you can do it on a city commission if you want. It'll work. But I'm starting to ramble and repeat myself, so I'm going to stop. I think people get the gist of what I'm saying.
Any other board members want to share about a message for the next board?
I do. So I would want the next board to really work with students. Our students are not tokens. We are not here to just be here and sit, but be also included in the conversation. From my experience, only a few of the board members on the board have actually reached out to me and helped me with some stuff. Not trying to throw shade or anything, but it's true. We're not tokens and we need to be a part of this conversation. If the space does not feel safe, if I'm not included, I'm not going to speak out. And that's why sometimes a lot of our students don't speak out, because we're not welcomed in the space. And especially like our time is valuable. We are here for a certain amount of time. And if if the space is not inclusive, then I'm always going to keep my opinions to myself. And I'm not like that. And I'm so glad that I'm not like that. But other trustees may not be like that in the future. So please, like, be really mindful of our students. We are a team. We're supposed to, you know, feel like a community, not like, you know, adults are in power, because I'm so tired of adults just being in power and not doing anything for our students. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Probably a good note to transition from that session. Carl had a thought, I think, for the end, and maybe we're there, maybe we're not there. And Carl, are you still with us? I know we've been.
am.
Okay.
I am.
There was a sort of final thought about any agreements the board wanted to make in the short term as they kind of close out these couple of months together. Maybe you want to reframe that based on this discussion, but just trying to decide if there are any sort of tangible takeaways for the group.
Sure. You're all going to be there. So what? Some early meeting in December?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, boy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So you're all going to be there till some meeting point in December, right?
Correct.
So are there any things that you need to do as a collective in your final couple months?
That is a good question.
In a way that sends a message to the future. And sitting here with you, clearly, I mean, you're obviously at an interesting point. Back when Long Beach transitioned from at-large elections to elections by trustee area, The establishment was absolutely convinced that this would be a disaster for the school district. The establishment was dead wrong. It actually turned out to revitalize the board and worked to make, because for the first time, the school board had both African American and Hispanic representation. And it actually worked to make the board much more credible with regard to the overall community that it served. So, are there any things that you want to do as a 5-person collective between now and that date in December where the new board is seated?
Any thoughts? Yes, Mr. Phillips. Oh,
I think that the board, maybe not the 5 of us, but I think the board has actually kind of done that in starting the superintendent search, because that is something that we've discussed, and we've discussed it with intentionality, in the idea that the purpose of this is to not leave, and the next board will make whatever decision it wants around who will be the superintendent, but that we will not just leave the next board holding the bag. So we have voted to do this. We have started, under the leadership of President Hernandez-Jarvis, started a subcommittee to get the ball rolling. So I think some of that is actually already happening. That might not be the answer you're looking for, but the board has had a discussion around the transition, and what we're trying to set up for the next board to do with as they please. But I think we've done this.
anyone else?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Dr. Cohen, are you talking about something the board does as a consensus, or something that 3 out of the 5 members of the board believe might be what, in their opinion, meets that?
I think consensus is always good, but obviously, you know, this is a tricky time for all of you. And so if you can't reach a consensus, I don't think, you know, there's anybody out there who's going to say, you know, these folks are awful because they can't reach a consensus in the final days of the term. I always view things from the point of view of, even if a transition is difficult, tricky, that there are things, there are messages that you want to send to the community about, to some degree, you know, just because we're going through electoral changes, it doesn't mean that this abiding concern for improving the school district isn't there, and perhaps you're doing that.
Right. I think my personal opinion is that my time on this board is winding down. I am not intending or have any intention, even if others might project it, to extend influence on this board. In fact, I think if folks look at the tenure of my history through the previous recordings, I've always been clear about that there's room for disagreement with what I think and what I feel. So for me, I think in many ways, I think this exercise that we just did in many ways is, for me anyway, anyhow, some of what you're talking about, where we can leave something collectively, some knowledge, some insight, some perspective for folks to do what they'd like at their prerogative. And it was something that almost everybody contributed to. But knowing that I will respect that new board and also recognize that I'm not going to vote to overstep what I think is my role in the last 2 meetings of my tenure, or actually even the last 2 or 3 months of what my tenure was, which I'm sure we all have different perspectives of what that meant. So for me, I think the only thing I can do is continue to be consistent between how I bring myself to my leadership role on behalf of the students and the families of West County, and to start to be thankful and exhibit my complete gratitude for the opportunity to serve this community over the last 6 years, and wish everybody well.
So I'd like to say that, to me, like, the last thing the board needs to do as a collective is to approve the first interim budget. You know, it's interesting how the timelines for seating new boards have changed in the last couple of years. And traditionally the new board was seated in time to approve the first interim budget. That's not how it is anymore, you know, unless this board decides to make a conscious decision to let the new board approve the first interim budget.
Okay. Are you finished? Oh, thank you, Mr. Panis, Trustee Panis. I have something that I think hopefully we could have a consensus about, and that is to show some appreciation, like Trustee Cueva said, the gratitude to individuals. I feel like I met new people and they're now part of my life and have been a part of my growth, and I really appreciate that. And I will probably be making some rounds about shout outs and things that I've learned and people have added to me. So to celebrate individuals, I think that could be something we could leave. Sometimes we don't tell each other enough those kinds of things. You don't realize the impression you have on people unless they tell you. And I think there's a lot of people that I'd like to share those things with. So I want to keep it positive and growth oriented. And so those are the things that I think we could do. And acknowledgements. Yeah, I just feel like we did not do that enough. And the student trustees who always said these very profound things that just wrapped it all up. And, you know, thank goodness we've got them, and we need to continue that and to listen and to share that out as well. So those are kind of my thoughts about what I'm hoping we could all agree on that. Thank you. Okay, Trustee
Can
Hernandez.
you still hear me?
Ah, yes, we got. Oh, yes.
You can hear me?
Trustee Lara? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for facilitating this meeting. I agree that I think one of our biggest responsibilities is to make sure that we join with the board in December, and that we talk with the new board and have the ability to exchange ideas and to check in. If we don't do it collectively, I think as much as possible, and letting go the work that we are doing now, and you know, making suggestions, offering support as well on how to continue creating the conditions for kids to achieve, because that's essentially the work that we're called to do. It doesn't matter who is in this seat, but what matters is that those conditions are created and they continue to be created, and that the system is built to benefit children. So I think that any actions that we take have to be with that at the helm. So that's what I would say for this. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, well, that was our last bit, and I do hope that there is learnings that can be exchanged, both about the content of what we're doing and also just governance in general. It's not easy, and board members, new and old, will need to continue to focus on it and do, as many people have said, build a team, because that's really the only way things move forward. Carl, do you have any closing thoughts, or any last
Sure.
needs or shares?
Yeah, I would just like, can you hear me? I would just like to wish you the best. And board governance is a tough, difficult assignment, but the rewards are extraordinary. And I appreciated the day that I spent in West Contra along with the staff from the Hewlett Foundation. There's a lot that is promising there. The other thing, I just joined the leadership council of a higher ed arm called California Competes, and got to know a West Contra parent, Sujan Jazz, and let me tell you, if she is at all representative of parents in your district, wow, you have some extraordinary strengths in how you can all work together to bring an approach that actually focuses on how can we better serve those who historically have been underserved. This is incredibly important work. So I thank you for the honor of spending some time with you. Good luck to all of you, and good luck to the new board.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you so much for coming and sharing some of your learnings with us and asking some key questions. I hope it was helpful for the group, whether they're staying or going, just as we continue to be learners and continue to learn. So thank you again. Carl, I'll give you a call and follow up and debrief on any next steps. And for the rest of the board members, we'll see you at our next meeting.
Sure.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Thanks. Good night.
Good night.
Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.